just going to finish up with some book reading so I can finally get rid of some of these books. So, yeah. Ancestors and the Dunmer. Ghosts walk among them. The departed spirits of the Dunmer, and perhaps those of all races, persist after death. The knowledge and power of departed ancestors benefits the bloodlines of the Dunmer houses. The bond between the living family members and immortal ancestors is partly blood, partly ritual, partly volitional. A member brought into the house through marriage binds himself through ritual and oath into the clan and gains communication and benefits from the clan's ancestors. However, his access to the ancestors is less than his offspring, and he retains some access to the ancestors of his own bloodline. The family shrine. Each residence has a family shrine. In poorer homes, it may be no more than a hearth or an alcove, where family relics are displayed and venerated. In wealthy homes, a room is set aside for the use of the ancestors. This shrine is called the Waiting Door and represents the door to oblivion. Here the family members pay their respects to their ancestors through sacrifice and prayer, through oaths sworn upon duties, and through reports on the affairs of the family. In return, the family may receive information, training, and blessings from the family's ancestors. The ancestors are thus the protectors of the home, and especially the precincts of the Waiting Door. The Ghost Fence. It is the family's most solemn duty to make sure their ancestors' remains are interred properly in a city of the dead, such as Necrom. Here the spirits draw comfort from one another against the chill of the mortal world. However, as a sign of great honour and sacrifice, an ancestor may grant that part of his remains be retained to serve as part of a ghost fence, protecting the clan's shrine and family precincts. Such an arrangement is often part of the family member's will, that a knucklebone shall be saved out of his remains and incorporated with solemn magic and ceremony to a clan ghost fence. In more exceptional cases, an entire skeleton or even a preserved corpse may be bound into a ghost fence. These remains become a beacon and focus for ancestral spirits and for the spirit of the remains in particular. The more remains used to make a ghost fence, the more powerful the fence is. And the most powerful mortals in life have the most powerful remains. The Great Ghost Fence, created by the tribunal to hold back the blight, incorporates the bones of many heroes to the temple and of the houses Indoril and Redoran, who dedicated their spirits to the temple and clan as their surrogate families. The Ghost Fence also contains bones taken from the catacombs of Necrom and the many battlefields of Morrowind. The Mortal Chill. Spirits do not like to visit the mortal world, and they do so only out of duty and obligation. Spirits tell us that the other world is more pleasant, or at least more comfortable than our real world. Comfortable for spirits than our real world, which is cold, bitter, and full of pain and loss. Mad spirits. Spirits that are forced to remain in our world against their will may become mad spirits or ghosts. Some spirits are bound to this world because of some terrible circumstances of their death. Or because some powerful emotional bond to a person, place, or thing. Some spirits are captured and bound to enchanted items by wizards. If the binding is involuntary, the spirit usually goes mad. A willing spirit may or may not retain its sanity depending on its strength, on the strength of the spirit and the wisdom of the enchanter. Some spirits are bound against their will to family shrines. This unpleasant fate is reserved for those who have not served the family faithfully in life. Dutiful and honourable ancestral spirits often aid in the capture and binding of wayward spirits. These spirits usually go mad and make terrifying guardians. They are ritually prevented from harming mortals of their clan, but that does not necessarily discourage them from mischievous or peevish behaviour. They are exceedingly dangerous for intruders. At the same time, if an intruder can penetrate the spirit's madness and play upon the spirit's resentment of his own clan, the angry spirits may be manipulated. Oblivion. The existence of oblivion is acknowledged by all Tamriel cultures, but there is little agreement on the nature of that other world, other than it is the place where the Aedra and Daedra live, and that communication and travel are possible between this world and oblivion through ritual and magic and ritual. The Dunmer do not emphasize the distinction between this world and oblivion as do the human cultures of Tamriel. They regard our world and the other world as a whole, with many paths from one end to the other rather than two separate worlds of different natures with distinct borders. This philosophical viewpoint may take account for the greater affinity of elves for magic and its practices, foreign views of Dunmeri ancestor worship and spirit magic. The Altmeri and Bosmeri cultures also venerate their ancestors, but only by respecting the orderly and blissful passage of these spirits from this world to the next. That is, Wood Elves and High Elves believe it is cruel and unnatural to encourage spirits of the dead to linger in our world. Even more grotesque and repugnant is the display of the bodily remains of ancestors in ghost fences and ash pits. The presentation of finger bones in a family shrine, for example, is sacrilegious to the Bosmer, who eat their dead, and barbaric to the Altmer, who inter their dead. The human cultures of Tamriel are ignorant and fearful of dark elves and their culture, considering them to be inhuman and evil, like orcs and Argonians, but more sophisticated. The human populations of Tamriel associate Dunmeri ancestor worship and spirit magic with necromancy. In fact, this association of the Dark Elves with necromancy is at least partly responsible for the dark reputation of Dunmer throughout Tamriel. This is generally an ignorant misconception, for necromancy outside the acceptable clan rituals is a most abhorrent abomination in the eyes of the Dunmer. The Dark Elves would never think of practicing sorcerous necromancy upon any Dark Elf, or upon the remains of any elf. However, Dark Elves consider the human and orcish races to be little more than animals. There is no injunction against necromancy upon such remains, or on the remains of any bird, animal, or insect. Imperial policy officially recognizes the practices of Dunmeri ancestor veneration and spirit magic as a religion, and protects their freedom to pursue such practices as long as they do not threaten the security of the Empire. Privately, most Imperial officers and traders believe Dark Elf ancestor worship and displays of remains as are barbaric or even necromantic. Telvanni necromancy. The Telvanni are adept masters of necromancy. They do not, however, practice necromancy upon the remains of Dark Elves. Sane Telvanni, yes, emphasis on the sane, regard such practices with loathing and righteous anger. They do practice necromancy upon the remains of animals and upon the remains of humans, orcs, and Argonians, who are technically no more than animals in Morrowind. Yeah, look how that turned out. Publisher's note: this book was written by an unknown scholar as a guide to foreign visitors to Morrowind shortly after the armistice was signed. Many of these practices have since fallen into disfavour. The most obvious changes are those regarding the practice of necromancy and the Great Ghost Fence. Dunmer today regard necromancy upon any of the accepted races as an abomination. The ghost fence has forced many changes in the practice of ancestor worship, with the vast majority of ancestors' remains going to strengthen the great ghost fence around the mountain of Dagorthur, and there are many few clan ghost fences in Morrowind. The temple discourages such practices among houses as selfish. The upkeep of family tombs and private waiting doors has also fallen into disfavour, as very few remains have been buried in these tombs and shrines since the armistice. In recent years, most Dunmer venerate a small portion of their ancestors' remains kept at a local temple. Yes, this book is outdated by at least 200 years, I would say. References to the false tribunal and so forth. Yep, tail end. Yeah, we're more or less wrapping up now to Baldus. Just gonna read a couple of these books so that then I can finally sell them on. So, Forge, Hammer and Anvil by Adolphus Eretius. These notes were found in in ruins near Old Hroldan. As best I can tell, they were written by Thorvald, a rather infamous smith, who died shortly before Tiber Septim's reign. He was rumoured to be illiterate, and given that these notes are obviously written by an assistant, that rumour is likely true. I have made no attempt to correct the texts themselves, as they may have historical value. Without further ado, the ramblings of Thorvald. This ain't no book for how to be a great smith. So if you're reading this, stop. It's just me own notes, cause I'm getting old and cranky and don't remember stuff. These be me own methods for making things: iron, armour and weapons. Lots of iron ingots and some leather strips. Steel, armour and weapons. Lots of steel ingots, a little iron and some leather strips. Except for steel plate, it needs some corundum too. Okay. Leather armour and weapons. Who'd be stupid enough to make leather weapons? Leather armour needs leather, big pieces and little pieces, just like hide armour and studded armour, scaled armour too. Well, that needs some steel also, and corundum. Can't make scaled armour without corundum, that would be dumb. Dwarfen armour and weapons. Dwarfen scrap metal, some iron and some leather strips. I'm gonna stop saying leather because it's always used. Are you writing what I just said? You idiot, just do it. Don't write it. Thorvald is old and fat. Elven armour and weapons. Elves and dwarfs didn't get along, but you didn't know that. Bet you didn't know that. Elven stuff needs moonstone and a bit of iron, except for that gilded stuff. Gotta add quicksilver if you want to make gilded elven armour. Orcish armour and weapons. Use orichalcum and a bit of iron. Thorvald doesn't like orcs. Fair enough. Ebony armour and weapons. Takes only ebony, no iron, not even a little. You'll want to, but don't. Glass armour and weapons. Need malachite and some moonstone. Nasty stuff working with malachite. Daedric armour and weapons. Ha! Like I'd write that down. He uses 2 Daedra hearts. I don't know where he gets them. That's all, you can stop writing now. I said stop. Postscript. The last page had a large streak of ink and a few splatters of blood. It would be a fair conclusion that Thorvald beat his assistant. We have no way of knowing if Thorvald ever discovered the extraneous comments added to his script. Adolphus Eretius. I've never taken the time actually to read any of the books, so yes, I quite enjoyed that one actually. I think we'll do Galerion the Mystic an incident of necrome. I'm definitely keeping the dream stride though, regardless of what else we sell. So, Galerion the Mystic by Asgrim Kolsgreg. During the early bloody years of the Second Era, Vanus Galerion was born under the name Trectus, a serf on the estate of a minor nobleman, Lord Girnas, of Solicic on Ker. No ideas if I pronounced any of that right. Trectus's father and mother were common labourers, but his father had secretly, against the law of Lord Girnasa, taught himself and then Trectus to read. Lord Girnas had been advised that literate serfs were an abomination of nature and dangerous to themselves and their lords, and had closed all bookstores within Solicic on Ker. All booksellers, poets, and teachers were forbidden, except within Girnas's keep. Nevertheless, a small-scale smuggling operation kept a number of books and scrolls in circulation right under Girnas's shadow. When Trectus was 8, the smugglers were found and imprisoned. Some said that Trectus's mother was an ignorant and religious woman, fearful of her husband. An ignorant and religious woman, fearful of her husband, was the betrayer of the smugglers, but there were other rumours as well. The trial of the smugglers was non-existent and the punishment swift. The body of Trectus's father was kept hanging for weeks during the hottest summer Solicic on Ker had seen in centuries. 3 months later, Trectus ran away from Lord Girnas's estate. He made it as far as Alinor, halfway across Somerset Isle. A band of troubadours found him nearly dead, curled up in a ditch by the side of the road. They nursed him to health and employed him as an errand boy in return for food and shelter. One of the troubadours, a soothsayer named Heliand, began testing Trectus's mind and found the boy, though shy, to be preternaturally intelligent and sophisticated given his circumstances. Heliand recognised in the boy a commonality, for Heliand had been trained on the Isle of Artaeum as a mystic. When the troupe was performing in the village of Potenza on the far eastern end of Somerset, Heliand took Trectus, then a boy of 11, to the Isle of Artaeum. The magister of the isle, Iachesis, recognised potential in Trectus and took him on as a pupil, giving him the name of Vanus Galerion. Vanus trained his mind on the Isle of Artaeum as well as his body. Thus was the first Archmagister of the Mages Guild trained. From the Sigics of the Isle of Artaeum, he received his training. From his childhood of want and injustice, he received his philosophy of sharing knowledge. And yeah, incident at Necrome. By Jonkia both. Okay. The situation simply is this, said Flaxith. I'm going to say Flaxith. His face as chiseled and resolute as any statue. Everyone knows that the cemetery west of the city is haunted by some malevolent beings and has been for many years now. The people have come to accept it. They bury their dead by daylight and away from Massa and Secunda and are away before Massa and Secunda have risen and the evil comes forth. The only victims to fall prey to the devils within are the very stupid and the outsiders. It seems like a natural solution to filtering out undesirables then, laughed Nitra, a tall middle-aged woman with cold eyes and thin lips. Where is the gold in saving them? From the temple. They're reopening a new monastery near the cemetery, and they need the land cleansed of evil. They're offering a fortune, so I accepted the assignment with the caveat that I could assemble my own team to split the reward. That's why I sought you each out. From what I've heard, you, Nitra, are the best bladesman in Morrowind. Nitra smiled her unpleasant best. And you, Osmic, are a renowned burglar, though never once imprisoned. I am so glad that this book has exposition. Flaxith is how I pronounce it, I think. Flaxseed would... yeah, okay, I'll say flaxseed. The bald-pated young man stammered as if to refute the charges before grinning back. I'll get you in where you need to go, but then it's up to you to do what you need to do. I'm no combatant. Anything Nitra and I can handle, I'm sure Masitha will prove her mettle, Flaxith said. I already fucked it up. Oh well. Turning to the fourth member of the party. She comes on very good references as a sorceress of great power and skill. Masitha was the picture of innocence, round-faced and wide-eyed. Nitra and Osmic looked at her uncertainly, particularly watching her fearful expressions as Flaxith described the nature of the creatures haunting the cemetery. It was obviously that she had never faced any adversary other than man and Myr before. If she survived, they thought to themselves, it would be surprising. As the foursome trudged towards the graveyard at dusk, they took the opportunity to quiz their new teammates. Vampires are filthy creatures, said Nitra. Disease-ridden, you know. They say off to the west. They'll indiscriminately pass on their curse together with a number of other afflictions. They don't do that here so much, but still you don't want to leave their wounds untreated. I take it you know something of the spells of restoration if one of us gets bit. I know a little, but I'm no healer, said Masitha meekly. More of a battle mage? asked Osmic. I can do a little damage if I'm really close, but I'm not very good at that either. I'm more of an illusionist, technically. Nitra and Osmic looked at one another with naked concern as they reached the gates of the graveyard. There were moving shadows, stray spectres among the wreck and ruins. Crumbled paths stacked on top of crumbled paths. Sorry, my voice is starting to give out if you can't tell. Crumbled paths stacked up on top of crumbled paths. It wasn't a maze of a place. It could have been any dilapidated graveyard, but even without looking at the tombstones, it did have one very noticeable feature. Filling the horizon was the mausoleum of a minor Cyrodiilic official from the Second Era, slightly exotic, but still harmonizing with the Dunmer graves in a complementary style called Decay. Yeah, it really it really does devote us. Yeah. It's a surprisingly useful school, whispered Masitha defensively. You see, it's all concerned with Magicka's ability to alter the perception of objects without changing their physical compositions. Removing sensual data, for example, to cast darkness or remove sound or smell from the air. It can help by a red-haired vampire woman leapt out of the shadows in front of them, knocking Flaxith on his back. Nitra quickly unsheathed her sword, but Masitha was faster. With a wave of her hand, the creature stopped, frozen, her jaws scant inches from Flaxith's throat. Flaxith pulled out his own blade and finished her off. That's illusion? Asked Osmic. Certainly, smiled Masitha. Nothing's changed in the vampire's form, except its ability to move. Like I said, it's a very useful school. The four climbed up over the paths to the front gateway to the crypt. Osmic snapped the lock and disassembled the poison trap. The sorceress casts a wave of light down down the dust-choked corridors, banishing the shadows and drawing the inhabitants out. Almost immediately, they were set upon by a pair of vampires howling and screaming in a frenzy of bloodlust. The battle was joined, so no sooner were the first two vampires felled than their reinforcements attacked. They were mighty warriors of uncanny strength and endurance, but Masitha's paralysis spell and the weaponry of Flaxith and Nitra clove through their ranks. Even Osmic aided the battle. "They're crazy," gasped Masitha when the fight finally ended and she could catch her breath. "Quara, the most savage of the vampire bloodlines," said Flaxith. "We have to find and exterminate each and every one." Stabbing into the crypts, the group hounded out more of the creatures. Christ, how long is this book? Though they varied in appearance, each seemed to rely on their strength and claws for attacking, and subtlety did not seem to be the style of any. Yeah, my voice is going. When the entire mausoleum had been searched and every creature within destroyed, the four finally made their way to the surface. It was only an hour until sunrise. There was no frenzied scream or howl. Nothing rushed forward towards them. The final attack, when it happened, was so unlike the others that the questers were taken utterly by surprise. The ancient creature waited until the four were almost out of the cemetery, talking amiably, making plans for spending their share of the reward. He judged carefully who would be the greatest threat, and then launched himself at the sorceress. Had Flaxith not turned his attention back from the gate, she would have been ripped to shreds before she had a chance to scream. The vampire knocked Masitha across the stone, its claws raking across her back, but stopped its assault in order to block a blow from Flaxith's sword. It accomplished this maneuver in its own brutal way by tearing the warrior's arm from its socket. Osmic and Nitra set on it, but they found themselves in a losing battle. Only when Masitha had pulled herself back up from behind the pile of rocks, weak and bleeding, that the fight turned. She cast a magical ball of flame at the creature, which was so enraged that it turned back to her. Nitra saw her opening and took it, beheading the vampire with a stroke of her sword. "So you do know some spells of distraction, like you said Nitra. "And a few spells of healing too," she said weakly, "but I can't save Flaxith." The warrior died in the bloody dust before them. The three were quiet as they travelled across the dawn-lit countryside back towards Necrom. Masitha felt the throb of pain in her back intensify as they walked, and then a gradual numbness like ice spread through her body. "I need to go to a healer and see if I've been diseased," she said as they reached the city. "Meet us at the Moth and Fire tomorrow morning," said Nitra. "We'll go to the temple and get our reward and split it there." 3 hours later, Osmic and Nitra sat in their room at the tavern, happily counting and recounting the gold marks. Split 3 ways, it was a very comfortable sum. "What if the healers can't do anything for Masitha?" smiled Osmic dreamily. "Some diseases can be insidious." "Did you hear something in the hall?" asked Nitra quickly. When she looked, there was no one there. When she returned, shutting the door behind her. "I'm sure Masitha will survive if she went straight to the healer, but we could leave tonight with the gold." "Let's have one last drink to our poor sorceress," said Osmic, leading Nitra out of the room towards the stairs down. Nitra laughed. Those spells of illusion won't help her track us down. As useful as they are, she keeps saying they are. Paralysis, light, silence. Not so good when you don't know where to look. They closed the door behind them. Invisibility is another spell of illusion, said Masitha's disembodied voice. The gold on the table rose in the air and vanished from sight as she slipped it into her purse. The door again opened and closed, and all was silent until Osmic and Nitra returned a few minutes later. Yes. Yes. Sorcerers are very much not to be taken lightly. Well, I very much enjoyed my time reading. We're just going to say that took 3 hours. Yeah, I've never read any of the books up until now, so it's been an interesting experience. Okay, so what I need to do at some point is go and see that Sinding.
At some point we should hire Tekla on here. If she could just spend less time serving Dengir.
I wish
Okay,
I
then.
could pay you both, Nari. I really do.
And eventually I'll see if there's any work going around here. And ideally I can try and forget about this whole Dragonborn nonsense that I seem to have been lumped with. And then I think once I'm done here, I'll maybe head back to Whiterun, see if sanity has been restored, but if not, like I say, I do have some things near Solitude that I was asked to do, so we'll see how that goes. Yes, that sounds like a decent plan to me. So, yes, quite an enjoyable stream again, I would say, or for me personally anyway. I do hope that's the case for everyone else. So, yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you again soon, hopefully. Take care, everyone.